If you were to just watch only David Goggins content from here on out, you would assume that the more that you stress yourself, the better, constantly, right? The idea behind a hormetic curve tells us that we need to inflict a certain amount of stress upon ourselves to develop resilience and build adaptation. But then it's a sharp drop off once that adaptation is made. If you go too far, you go from what doesn't kill you makes you stronger to what doesn't kill you kills you slowly over time. And this is a very important thing. We have to understand this whole balance, right? So when we look at hormetic stressors, I caution you because I don't want you to just say, I need to inflict as much stress as I possibly can in my life so that I become as just resilient as I can. There's something called the anti-fragile concept, and that sometimes takes that a little bit too far, right? I do believe in becoming anti-fragile. Like, you don't want to be soft and totally like babied and cushed for the rest of your life, but you do want to also keep a wolf at the door for too much stress. So jumping right into how this whole process works, we're going to talk about intermittent fasting, how it acts as a hormetic stressor, but also understanding when too much fasting is at play and how you can kind of balance that out. So let's go ahead and dive in. Down below, there is a 30% off discount link for your entire grocery order through Thrive Market. It's a Thrive Market membership-based grocery store, but that link is super cool because if you wanted to go there and order, I don't know, anything, keto food, paleo food, whatever, you'll save 30% off your whole grocery order. So one of my favorite pastimes used to be going to the grocery store and just shopping and looking at different items that are there. But now that's not that fun anymore. I guess just because I'm busy and I have kids and a family, and it's just, now it makes it a lot simpler for me to go online, sort by different diet types, see what I want to get the job done in a matter of minutes and have it at my doorstep in a couple of days, but also save some money in the process. So that link down below saves you 30% off. It's an exclusive link, so 30% off your entire grocery order plus a $50 free gift when you use that link. So check them out down below in the description. I'm going to lead off with a study that's published in the journal Nature Reviews. Now, it was done on mice, okay, but it's still very interesting. It took a look at caloric restriction. It found that when these mice were restricting calories, and they restricted calories by 30%, they had an increase in lifespan of 10%. Now, that doesn't sound like much, especially considering how many calories were being restricted. Okay, but that's not the point of this study. What was really interesting with this was 10% increase in lifespan there. But when they took the same caloric restriction, but they aligned their eating with their circadian rhythm. In other words, they still restricted calories 30%, but when they did eat, they had them eat during their waking hours and during these normal hours for eating, right? They weren't spread out throughout random times. They aligned with their circadian cues. Guess how much their lifespan increased? 35%. So the caloric deficit was the same. The only difference was they were eating in line with their circadian cues. Now, I am a math guy just as much as you are. I understand thermodynamics. I understand that piece there, but I also have some understanding of the fact that we're an open thermodynamic system. That means that different things come into play, meaning if I tell you to just save money, that's great, but it doesn't mean it's going to help you save money, right? Same kind of thing. If I tell you to eat less and burn more calories, that's great and it's true, but it doesn't give us the whole equation. So understanding circadian cues and understanding that, which I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole too much, the point is that this was very interesting. Allowing a stressor, caloric restriction, to come into play along with proper implementation of timing to sort of alleviate some of the stress and allow for proper rebuilding allowed for even more lifespan. Anyway, moving on to another study. This study was published in JAMA, J-A-M-A, and it took a look at 4 different groups. So with these groups, they had a 12.5% caloric restriction group. Okay, then they had a 12.5% caloric restriction group plus exercise. They had a very low calorie group that ate 890 calories. So tried to lose weight as fast as they could until they got to 15% total weight loss. And then of course, there was a control group. Okay, what they found with this is that DNA damage decreased throughout all the different intervention groups, not the control group. Now what this tells us is that the stress, regardless of how much stress, helps support DNA stability. And this is just a perfect picture of hormesis at its best. And I wanted to mention this because it does align with fasting too, because fasting, obviously, you're putting yourself in this caloric deficit. Let's put this aside for a second and let's talk about the brain. Now this study was published in the journal Nutrients, and it took a look at intermittent fasting and its effect on brain aging, which I found very intriguing. So it took people that were regular intermittent fasters, people that were fasting 4 or 5 days per week generally. It also looked at irregular intermittent fasting, which didn't really specify specifically, but people that just sporadically would fast with no real rhyme or reason. And then of course it looked at non-fasters. What they found with this, they were looking to see how the brain would go through successful aging patterns. The group that fasted the most had about a 24% reversion. They reverted back to successful aging. 24% of them reverted back to successful aging. Now the irregular fasting group, about 14.2% of them reverted to successful brain aging, and the non-fasting group, only 3%. Okay, what this is painting a picture for with us isn't that more fasting is better. It's that when you start looking at finding that middle ground, that's what you want to look for. So why am I painting a picture like this? Okay, in this case, you'd look at this study, you'd say, okay, the people that fasted the most got the most brain benefit. Okay, but then you look at other studies and you see that if you start fasting too much, you have muscle protein breakdown and you start losing muscle mass. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute too. And then you start looking at some of these other studies where, okay, well, we need to align with circadian cues. So what we kind of gather from all this is your fasting schedule should look something like 2 or 3 days a week, somewhat randomized, in an early time restricted eating fashion. So where you are feeding during your daylight hours and cutting off calories relatively early. That's the best way to combine a hormetic stressor along with repair and rebuilding. Okay, now we move into exercise, because this is some interesting stuff and it does coincide along with fasting too. So the American Journal of Physiology published a rodent model study. Okay, it found that when they took mice at 28 weeks and had them exercise at moderate intensity, there was a 19% increase in lifespan in women and a 9% increase in lifespan in male mice. Now, they did this for 50 weeks, okay, and they found that as they got towards the end of that 50 weeks, say at 78 weeks, there was no more lifespan benefit. So the mice did not increase their lifespan by doing exercise at 78 weeks, but they did increase their lifespan by doing exercise at 28 weeks. I'm not saying this to discourage older folk, but what I am saying is that you get the longest and strongest benefit as far as longevity is concerned by exercising throughout your youth, and it carries over more. The reason that this is relevant with a hormetic stressor is simple. If you exercise at the same intensity when you're older, you're not going to get the same benefit. You're not going to get the same benefit as if you exercise at that same intensity when you're younger, because your ability to recover is better. Remember that when you stress yourself out, it's not the stress that does the work. It's the repair from the stress. And as you are older, that obviously becomes more difficult. The reason that when you're younger, you get a benefit from it is you get mitochondrial adaptation. Okay, the mitochondria, the energy powerhouse in the cell, adapts, you get more mitochondrial biogenesis, so you create more mitochondria. As you get older, your mitochondria become a little bit more dysfunctional, which means A, it's harder to sort of replicate that. It's harder to create more mitochondria when you already have some damaged mitochondria. But this doesn't mean don't exercise. I actually have a solution here. It just means that the higher intensity work is best suited for younger individuals. As you get older, lower intensity resistance training becomes better. And there was an interesting paper that demonstrated that there is a 40 to 70% decrease in cardiovascular disease death in those that added resistance training in. Now, I'm a mechanistic guy. I don't lean on it all the time, but I like to know the why, right? What's happening here is it has to do with somewhere for blood to go at 2 levels. If you build muscle, you have more places for blood to flow at rest. But simply weight training allows you to pump blood into these nooks and crannies and get a muscle pump, so to speak, which everyone makes fun of, but chasing the pump is actually a great thing. And that relieves blood pressure. That gives the blood somewhere to go, and it allows blood pressure to decrease. It has a beta blocker-like effect in some ways. So as you get older, if you've missed the boat of a chronic and more intense exercise when you were younger, you want to get more adaptive by working within your means. So you want to do more resistance training, still keep the heart healthy with that zone 2, zone 3 cardio, but throw the HIIT out the window. Don't worry about the Orange Theory if you're 60 plus years old. It's just not going to help you all that much. It might just add more stress that doesn't benefit you. Now, one thing I want to touch on real quick, because I know it's going to come up, is going to be the world of cold exposure. Cold exposure is a tough situation because people talk about cold exposure kind of inducing this oxidative stress, and it does induce oxidative stress And you don't want to chronically be exposing yourself to cold water because yes, that can cause damage too. But it all depends on A, your age and your level of resilience at play in the beginning. Okay, so there was a study that took a look at winter swimmers. So these are people that were very accustomed to swimming in pretty cold water. Now, they're not swimming in 30-degree water. They're probably swimming in 50 to 60-degree water in the ocean in the winter months. But what they saw with this was pretty interesting. They saw that they had increases in glutathione levels and they had decreases in oxidized glutathione peroxidase, meaning glutathione was elevated, but there was less glutathione actually having to neutralize things. Glutathione peroxidase is a way of measuring, or oxidized glutathione peroxidase is a way of measuring how hard that glutathione has had to work to neutralize things. Pretty cool. Okay, so this tells us a lot. They also found there were some increases in superoxide dismutase as well, which tells us that the endogenous antioxidants were upregulating too. So does this align with fasting? Should you do this with fasting? This is one of those things where you have to pick your stressor. Okay, I used to think that more stress was good. I used to think that by fasting and doing all these things while fasted would only make me stronger. But now, as I get closer to my 40s, I start thinking, okay, shoot, I have to pay attention to this. Maybe I don't want to be stressing myself out with fasting, also doing cold water, and then maybe also doing some chronic hard exercise. Okay, it's all a balance. On the days you're not fasting, pick a different stressor. Rotate your stressors. The next one is the last one I want to talk about, but very, very interesting research coming out, specifically with insulin resistance and sauna usage. So the International Journal of Hyperthermia published a paper. Unfortunately, it was in mice, so we can't take it all the way to the bank, but I still get excited about this kind of stuff. They exposed mice to high temperatures in a sauna, and they got their core body temperature up to a little over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius, okay? And what they found with this was that when they did that just for 5 minutes, it decreased their fasting glucose and their fasting insulin levels tremendously. They saw a 31% decrease in their fasting glucose and insulin. And they also saw an increase in mRNA expression of GLUT4. So what that means is that they were producing more glucose transporters as a result of the stress. The stress of the heat told the body that they need to go into overdrive, and that changed genetic makeups, the mRNA, to create more GLUT4 transporters to bring glucose into the cell. Now, we already know the stuff about heat shock proteins and HSP70 and chaperoning proteins. That's Dr. Rhonda Patrick's work. Tons of stuff. I've done a million things on my channel about that, but this is pretty revolutionary stuff, understanding that saunas can, even in the short term and long term, help glucose facilitation and help that uptake. My point in saying all of this is we do need to rotate our stressors. We need to make sure that we're backing off when we feel like we're getting too stressed out and having that objective look at our fasting and have that objective look at what we're doing as a hormetic stressor in the first place. So as always, keep it locked in here on my channel, and I'll see you tomorrow.